The story I'm about to tell is true. Well, mostly true. Some of it is lies, but some of the lies are true. I'll leave it up to you to decide. What is the truth anyway? People talk about my truth and your truth, but it's invariably what suits us at the time. And a half-truth isn't the truth at all. And that's why this is just a story. This part of the journey drags on and on. Though it's only an hour and 15 minutes from St Pancras to Ramsgate, by Canterbury, the train begins to crawl like a crippled pilgrim towards Becket's shrine. It's at this point I get impatient. It's almost like time itself has expanded, slow-moving and thick like treacle, and the more I put my attention on it, the slower it becomes. Memories fade in and out of my mind, and with them a lifetime of good intentions and regrets. I try and distract myself by looking out of the window, and through the gaps in the hawthorn I get glimpses of the kayaks and canoes on the River Stour, and piebald horses grazing lazily in the fields. We crossed the River Wonsum, described by St Bede as about 3 furlongs broad, and is now silted up with the sands of time to become no more than a stream. And yet I'm here, finally. I've crossed over onto the sacred isle. I've been away for half a year now, and I'm anxious for home. According to legend, the Isle of Thanet was the underworld, home to the dead. The bodies were rowed across the sea in unmanned boats in the middle of the night, and returned empty before dawn. The Bronze Age burial mounds that littered the island were visible from the sea for centuries, until they were eventually levelled by the plough. I'm not coming here to die, but I know that coming here will be the death of something. I'm just not sure what it is. My relationship, perhaps. Things had gone badly wrong with my girlfriend in America, and with no sign of the pandemic going away, I wasn't sure if I would ever see her again. But there is something more, like I'm ready to surrender to something. Well, we can't always know. I'll just have to accept that there's something in the air.
The next station is Ramsgate.
After an eternity, the train pulls into the platform, its heavy wheels grinding against the screaming rails. I pull my sleeve over my hand and press the button several times and wait for the door to open. The first thing that hits me is a wall of fresh air, the freshest air you've ever breathed, with a hint of salt and seaweed. Such a surprise after the city. And then the stark cries of the seagulls to welcome me home. Vincent van Gogh, who stayed here and taught at a school in Spencer Square, wrote in a letter home, "This town has something very singular. One notices the sea in everything." Like his paintings, Ramsgate is a sensory experience. It's vital. It's immediate. And to fully appreciate its beauty, it's necessary to look and listen. And as I walk along the station platform, I'm somehow more alert, more alive even. And I realise I have, just for a moment, stopped the incessant thinking that ordinarily plagues my mind. "These are really happy days," Vincent continued, "the ones I'm spending here, day after day. And yet it's a happiness and peacefulness that I don't trust entirely. Yes, my friend, I don't trust it either." I ascend the stone steps into the station hall with its parquet floor and lofty ceiling built in the 1920s after the station at Ramsgate Harbour closed. In those days, passengers would literally embark at the beach, having emerged through a tunnel in the cliff. But the new station was located, more conveniently, for the railway engineers at least, a mile out of town. Today its grandeur has faded, and it's in badly need of a coat of paint. I can make out the name W.H. Smith's, familiar from my childhood, above the old newspaper booth, an entrance to what was the cafe and bar, now boarded up. The world has speeded up since then. People no longer have the time to wait for a train. Since I was here last, the glazed mahogany doors have been replaced with automated ones that jerk open violently when anyone approaches. For 100 years they just prop them open, Now in winter, the staff wear summer short-sleeved shirts with their fan heater blasting away under the counter. No one dresses for the cold anymore. It's as if people refuse to accept the existence of the seasons. And as I turn to leave, the doors swing open, narrowly missing my head, and I'm caught instead by an unwelcome curtain of hot air from above. As I step outside, I'm already in a sweat. I ignore the waiting minicabs. I can't bear any more confinement right now. The walk to my house is only 10 minutes, and I can cut through the park. I've seen photos of Ellington Park in the 1890s. Ladies in silk dresses and bonnets, and the men in suits with canes as they promenade around the flower gardens and fountains. Today it's mostly dog walkers, who greet one another and inquire about each other's dogs while they pick up poo. At one time planning was granted here for a housing estate, but it was shelved when locals put up a fight. Today a new cafe is arising from the ashes, in place where the Victorian Pavilion once stood, and the old bandstand is being renovated with lottery money. Last time I was here it was fenced off and had pigeons nesting in the roof. I'm glad it's being fixed up. It's one of the first signs that the town is coming back to life, and on the whole people look happy in the park, walking amongst the flowers and the trees. As I ascend the hill to exit, people greet me. "Good morning," or is it "good afternoon," they say with a smile. This is a friendly place, a far cry from the city where you become invisible, or wish to be invisible. After moving down from London, one of the first things you realise about Ramsgate is that you don't have to hide, you don't need to pretend, and you certainly don't need to be cool. I've long known that anyone who is trying to be cool isn't cool. After London and Manhattan, I'm weary of hiding behind that mask. Ramsgate just is. It's not telling you how to be. Kerouac would have liked it here. He wrote even before On the Road was published that nothing can be more dreary than coolness. Not natural quietness, but postured, secretly rigid coolness that covers up the fact that they're unable to convey anything of interest. People hide because they're worried about how they are seen. But how will we grow if we don't muck things up now and again? Yes, if I'm going to get things wrong, it might as well be here. I get to my street. It's called Paradise, named, I'm told, rather too often by the locals, for the retired sea captains who settled far enough away that they couldn't hear the sea. Well, that sounds a bit cynical. Any fisherman I've ever met loves the sea. It was more likely the road with all the brothels like Love Lane and Margate. There's an oast house on the street, evidence of a nearby brewery founded in the 1400s. But whether it was named for its peace and quiet, its beer or its sex workers, it is a kind of paradise. Most of all, it's quiet. Well, mostly. One side of the street was pulled down in the 1960s before the houses got listed, and directly opposite mine stands a car spray shop. Ours is an unhappy marriage of residential and light industry. The owner has a boyish fascination with cars, that's spraying them and revving them and continually opening and slamming the doors. He was here when the street was run down and looks upon the newcomers with a fair amount of contempt. But the houses have stood for 300 years and will no doubt outlive his cars. Overshadowed by the grander Victorian and Regency terraces that Ramsgate is famous for, these houses with Dutch gable ends became fashionable in the early 18th century in the wake of William of Orange's invasion with his army of 20,000 Protestants to seize the throne of England from the Catholic King James. As I opened the door to the house, I'm met by the familiar smell of old wood and stone. In 1720, it was a sea captain's house, modern and functional and built like a ship. The main beam that supports the house is a ship's mast. You can see the holes cut into it for the rigging. There's an old sword hanging above the mantelpiece that I tell everyone belonged to the captain who lived here, but in actual fact I found in an antique shop in London years ago. It doesn't do any harm. I'm happy to believe it myself. This is a place that's only half real and half fantasy, my refuge by the sea, where if things go bad, I can batten down the hatches and ride out the storm. The floorboards bend and creak a little underfoot, and I fall into an old armchair to take off my boots. I look around the room, at the junk I've accumulated over a lifetime. There's nothing of real value. A couple of vases that my grandma brought back from Japan, some pewter plates and jugs on the mantel, and a framed film festival award from the time I almost made it. I wonder if my kids will want any of it, I ask myself, as I realise I'm thinking about death again. Jesus stares down at me with pitiful eyes. I don't believe in God, I say to myself as I quickly make the sign of the cross. On the kitchen table, there's a little watercolour portrait of a woman on a motorcycle. It's an image from a film I made years ago. One of my guests must have Googled it and made a little painting by way of thank you. It's rather touching. I love it when people enjoy the old house. They were Americans, I think. They can appreciate the 18th century living, and I appreciate the money. I go into the garden and say hi to my dog. She's buried under the apple tree. I think she was 15 when I put her down, and that was the only time I ever took her to the vet. What a dog. I know everyone says that. But even when she was alive, she never judged me, and her acceptance and humility was something I can only marvel at. How much we can learn about ourselves from our animals. There's a flock of sparrows in the bush, and they chirp and cheep, and the gulls swoop and dive and cry up in the blue. The weather is always fine in Ramsgate. I think there's some kind of microclimate here, something about being an island, well, almost an island. It's never long before the bad weather is chased away. I know it doesn't rain much. There's a leak in my kitchen roof. It's hardly worth fixing. I remember living in the southwest and it pissed it down for 3 summers in a row. I even got vitamin D deficiency. No, this is a special place. But other than the fact that my visa in the US ran out, why am I here? I can't know. But be patient. All will be revealed. I put my head in the fridge and decide to go out for supplies. I walk up through Cannon Road car park, out towards the West Cliff and the port. I like this part of town. There are Victorian houses as grand as any in London, homes to middle-class families and their servants back in the day, and on through Vale Square where the white stucco villas surround the communal gardens. Royalty Villa was where Edward VII entertained Lily Langtry, now owned, I'm told, by a musician who lives in LA. They started to renovate a few years ago, but now the work has ground to a halt, and the windows are boarded up, and the garden full of builder's rubbish. Perhaps he's thinking of retiring here, but not just yet. I cross the West Cliff Road up past the Vinyl Head record shop and the pop-up gallery next door that rather unexpectedly has an exhibition of erotic photographs. Ramsgate is full of surprises. Addington Street was the old high street, and the houses nearly all have shop windows, and several, I'm glad to see, are actually turning back into shops. It's a shame when shops are converted into houses or flats. Once they're gone, they're gone. Otherwise all we're left with are the supermarkets, and where there are supermarkets there are cars. I shudder at the thought as I defiantly walk down the middle of the road. I've had some nice cars in my time, but now I wouldn't be unhappy if I'd never got in one again. There's a furniture store that I like. There's Eats and Beats Cafe, run by a bass player from another pop band, and the Falstaff Inn that has a pretty decent restaurant and a cafe deli attached. Nowhere in Ramsgate is the process of gentrification more evident than Addington Street, although I'm told you can still buy heroin here. The artists move in first, and then the hipsters, and by the time the businessmen move in and the prices go sky high, we can all say we preferred it when it was a slum. Ramsgate is in flux. Even in the short time I've owned a house here, I've seen the boarded up cafes and restaurants slowly open up again. And now with excommunication from Europe and the return of the Black Plague, people are coming down in increasing numbers. I just hope things don't change too fast. There's something haunting about a British seaside town in winter. Of course, it's great to see people enjoying themselves in the summer, but in the winter, Ramsgate takes on an otherworldly quality. It's almost like you're living with the ghosts of the visitors over the centuries. You can almost see Coleridge striding up the beach after a dip in the sea, and Vincent van Gogh wandering around the town looking lost. In July and August, the demand for Airbnbs is so high that everybody's doing it. I usually vacate my house and go away somewhere and have a free holiday. I don't mind. Ramsgate people have been living off their visitors for 300 years. In the 19th century, a householder could live for an entire year off the rental of one season. Old postcards and photographs that I've found show crowds on the beaches and in town right up to the 1960s. Addington Street is deserted today, but I can't help imagining how it must have been when the shop windows were full of produce. Some of the lettering and glazed tiles remain from what was literally the butcher, the baker and the candlestick maker. Further on, one of the elegant bow front of houses from the Regency period is being done up to sell. The builders have ripped out all the doors, which are lying outside in a pile of rubble. When I look closer, each of them has a number on the front, from the days when the rooms would have been rented out to visitors, to the families who would have flocked here for their summer holidays to escape the pollution of the capital. And today it's once again an important source of income for a town that does nothing much else to make money but catch fish. Yes, Ramsgate is coming back to life. I wonder if it'll do the same for me. I met my girlfriend here. One day she knocked on the door and I thought, wow, I could fall in love with you. And I did. She was beautiful. She studied classics at Oxford and was emotionally damaged as I was. And that was the part of her I loved the most. We rode up and down the coast on my old motorcycle, swam in the sea and had a kiss in a cave under the white chalk cliffs. And when she was leaving, I gave her a bronze ring from the time before the Romans came. It looked like a wedding ring. I thought I might never see her again, but she messaged me when she was drunk one night to meet her in Cadaqués and said that she'd been thinking about me. And you know what that means. And we went to Venice, and then to Cannes, and then to Manhattan, and the Caribbean. And well, it was about that time I began to run out of money, and I had to sell my motorcycle. Actually, it was 2 motorcycles. And then I asked her to marry me at Hadrian's Wall, and I meant it. And she said yes, and I gave her a gold ring, Roman this time. And then later in the Catskills, the pandemic hit, and it all started to go wrong. I hadn't really noticed she was younger than me until I met her friends. Funny that when you have something you like, you want it to last forever. But the truth is, everything is just a fleeting moment in time. As fair thou art, my bonny lass, so deep in love am I, and I will love thee still, my dear, till all the seas gang dry. Till all the seas gang dry, my dear, and the rocks melt with the sun, and I will love thee still, my dear, while the sands of life shall run. And the girl's cry told you so, and in any case she was too young and pretty for you. I continue down the middle of the road hoping someone will run me over, when I'm suddenly met with a sight that never fails to make me gasp. My heart has started to beat faster, and I realise that I've been rushing to get here. In this moment, everything else pales into insignificance. The sky is vast, and I'm afraid, almost, in an agoraphobic way, but I can't bring myself to look away as I struggle to take it all in. Filling my entire field of vision are colossal clouds, moving like whole worlds in the grey-blue sky, constantly shifting colour and form, like an enormous lava lamp. Dancing shafts of light give birth to a million spangles on the jade-coloured sea, as it heaves to and fro hundreds of feet below. And in the far distance on the beaches of France, Napoleon and Hitler discuss their invasion plans, as the passing container ships, like floating continents, are lit up in massive, iridescent pools of light as they head up the channel. And passenger ferries, unstoppable, sail past the pier at Deal and on towards Dover. There's too much to take in, and it makes me dizzy, and every time I see it, it's as if it's for the very first time. I'm standing on Nelson Crescent where the houses are taller and wider than on Addington Street, and considerably more money. Judging by the paint jobs, I'm guessing most of them are now second homes for weekenders from London. The one on the corner, called Nelson's View, is where the Admiral stayed with his lover, Lady Hamilton, and her husband, when they visited Ramsgate in 1803. The affair caused a scandal, but Lord Hamilton, who was evidently an easygoing old fellow, didn't mind. But when Nelson was taken out by a French sniper at Trafalgar in 1805, society and his family quickly turned their backs on Emma, and she was forced to flee to Calais, where she eventually died of shame and French wine and laudanum. The same year, soldiers in scarlet uniforms marched in formation and postured and rattled their sabres on the parade grounds of the East Cliff. Another Napoleonic War parade ground, Spencer Square, just a few streets away from here, was owned by the Spencer family, as in Lady Diana fame, and is now a tennis court and gardens, overlooked by the bow-fronted white stucco townhouses where the officers and their families lived. It can't be denied that war makes money. Well, for some, at least. Daniel Defoe visited on his travels around England in 1723. He came to Ramsgate after he was outraged when he saw prostitutes copulating openly in the streets of Deal. He didn't like the people of Ramsgate much either, who he described as arrogant. The inhabitants are mighty fond of having us call it Romansgate, pretending that the Romans made their first attempt to land here, he wrote. But it is not proved. And yet 300 years later, archaeologists found a Roman fort at Pegwell Bay, which perfectly matched Julius Caesar's description of his landing in 54 BC, with his 800 ships, 20,000 soldiers, and 2,000 cavalry. Gaul had only recently been conquered, and Britain, which was on the very edge of the known world, represented a level of independence that the Romans could no longer tolerate. The last stronghold of the Druids. I wait impatiently for the cars to pass, and when there's a break in the traffic, I run across the road. It's quite an ordeal. I have to watch out for the cars coming from both directions, those accelerating up the hill and those gliding down it. And then once I'm across, I have to negotiate the bike lane, making sure I'm not silently mowed down by a cyclist. This country loves a fast road to separate the town from the sea. It's the same in Hastings and Brighton, all over the UK in fact. But over the channel, this would probably be a restricted road for emergency vehicles and deliveries for the bars and restaurants along the seafront. It's not a new idea. When Pompeii was excavated, they found bollards around the forum to stop the chariots coming in. Royal Parade was built in 1900 to open up access from the east and west cliffs. Surviving photographs from that time show no more traffic than a tram and a donkey cart. But today, cars tear up and down it in a frenzy, on their way to Broadstairs or Sandwich, Margate or Deal, anywhere it seems except Ramsgate. There's a crossing at the bottom of the road by the bus stop where people wait for the lines of cars to file by, and the infernal beep so they can cross. The car is still king here. So many fine buildings lost to the road widening, or demolished to make way for ugly car parks. The air poisoned for the personal convenience of getting around, and rarely more than one to a car. We're told there'll be no more petrol and diesel cars by 2030, and yet there's no sign of people wanting to give them up. It's a human right. They must drive to work, to the shops, or to the gym. No, I don't think Henry Ford did mankind a favour by making cars accessible to the masses. Personal convenience must ultimately come at a cost to us all. I hold on to the railings on the edge of the cliff and look down at the harbour. It's a spectacular sight and forms an elegant horseshoe of solid slabs of granite reaching out to the waves beyond. Moored in the safety of the inner harbour, there are fishing craft, a couple of bright orange lifeboats, and the usual white plastic yachts and gin palaces, all tied up along the pontoons. There's also a strange structure on legs that looks like it belongs in a futuristic disaster movie that I think is the terminus for the cables running from the wind farm just off the coast. You can see their boats speeding to and from the harbour, ostensibly to do the maintenance work on the turbines, but actually just to scare the fish and the dolphins. Next to the harbour is the port, which is where the passenger ferries arrive from Ostend. Now it's a pretty sad-looking patch of industrial land, with hundreds of imported cars waiting to be shipped off to the dealerships, and an ominous mountain of sand and a cement silo. Trucks like massive dinky toys hurriedly arrive and leave the scene before the cement can set. The company is dredging up sand from the bay and washing the salt out of it before adding it to the toxic cocktail of chemicals. Planning permission to extend the operation recently stalled on the grounds that they had failed to get an environmental assessment, which is mandatory under EU law. But now we're out of Europe, who will protect the environment? In the Kent Minerals and Waste Local Plan, Kent County Council pledges to protect the environment, but only where it can be demonstrated that the need for the proposed development is compelling and overrides the national importance of the site, which is another way of saying that they think the cement factory is more important than the environment. I still think the locals would make more money offering the tourists saltwater baths and good food and drink like they did 150 years ago. The real riches of Ramsgate we already have. It's the ocean and the beaches and the clean air and the historic architecture and the fact that people want to have their summer holidays here or move here with their children. And it's so close to Europe and the weather is great. And why would anyone want to destroy that? One of the blessings of the pandemic has been the lack of traffic in the sky. I don't mean the Spitfires and Hurricanes trying to take down the Bf-109s over the harbour in 1940, which killed 29 people and damaged or destroyed over 1,000 houses. Then at least people knew what they were up against. No, the threat from the sky today comes in the form of planned cargo night flights from Manston Airport, ironically the base for the RAF fighters that valiantly defended our coast. The proposed flight path of the jumbo jets, scheduled to take off and land throughout the night, goes over the town, ensuring not only sleepless nights for the residents, but an unprecedented air pollution problem at a time when our government tells us it's pledged to improve the environment. The green light was given by the Home Secretary, who I'm pretty sure has never been to Ramsgate. I'm assuming that having opted out of the EU, where we currently get 70% of our food, we will now have to import it from further afield, like Asia and Australia, anywhere as long as it requires large cargo planes. I've seen the stickers in the front windows of the houses around town. Some say, "Save Manston Airport," and others, "No night flights." Many of the locals, it seems, are in favour of the airport, partly because of nostalgia for Manston, and because they think it will create jobs. But who would want to come and stay in a town where you can't get a decent night's sleep? Who would buy in a town that has an air pollution problem? Ramsgate is divided, it seems, between people who want more services and jobs, and those, including the newcomers, who see tourism and renovation of the historic infrastructure as the way to regenerate the fortunes of the town. I look up to the sky and ask God what he thinks about it all. There are no jets to be seen, only gulls dancing on the waves of air and calling out, "Do you really think you're in charge?" We've been here for 1,000,000 years. There are strikingly divided and opposing values in this town, epitomised by those who can see the beauty of these ancient creatures and those who see them as pests. The poet and environmental activist Wendell Berry warned, "It's easy for me to imagine that the next great division of the world will be between people who wish to live as creatures and people who wish to live as machines."